we have, of course, had very, very many elections since the end of the Cold War, since the collapse of the Berlin Wall. But is it sufficient, really? Or is it good enough simply to be told that at least in Africa, elections are being held periodically without necessarily looking at the quality of those elections? Are they in fact, are most of these in fact, in your view, Raymond, elections, or are they what some call selections, really?
I think the focus in Africa should be less on the event, the elections, and what happens between the events, the governance process. The elections themselves are flawed. Some of them are flawed, some of them are less flawed than others. And that has to do with a lot of legacy issues, and also the fact that elections are frankly difficult to conduct. We see it across the world, that elections are a challenge logistically, a challenge in terms of financing and organizing, and also a challenge in terms of getting them as dispassionate as possible. But Africa is taking baby steps. As I said earlier, we need to move a lot faster for the politics and the elections to catch up with the economics. Mm-hmm. But what concerns me the most is what happens in between the elections. What happens to all the promises that are made during the elections? What happens to all the statements of intent? What happens to the electorate, the citizens? How are they served, and how do they themselves participate in this process? And if and when African countries could start focusing a lot on building the institutions, having the processes that more effectively connect the governed and those in governance positions, then we will start to see elections that are more meaningful and more impactful in the outcome, and also more strategic nodes in this process that is democratization.
I have news for you, Raymond. When you talk about the promises made during campaigning, electioneering, that is not something, frankly, that is limited to Africa. That seems to be universal, because someone will tell you that politicians, in fact, when they are running for office, they campaign in poetry. But when it comes to governing, they do that one in prose.
Mm-hmm. It's absolutely true, but the difference between most parts of the world and Africa is that other parts of the world do a better job of holding the politicians to task for what promises they made. In Africa, it seems as if you go from one election to the next, make a promise today, make another promise 5 years hence, and in between, we don't really hold their feet to the proverbial fire.
How do they do it? How do they do it in the developing world, which is not done in the? Rather, how do they do it in the developed world, and something that is not done in the developing world in terms of holding their leaders or rulers accountable?
One of the most important ways to do this is to get more civil society participation in the process. You have focus groups, you have a lot more interaction with your elected official, you have a lot more education, because you have people explaining the policy, where things are going, where this particular amount of effort, whether it is political or financial effort, which direction is it pointing, and what are the outcomes that you could expect. And so there's a bit more predictability in the process that allows civil society and the electorate to be a lot more engaged.
When you talk about civil society, Raymond, what exactly do you mean by that? Because you will even go to a country that is under dictatorship and you'll be told that this is civil society. In fact, civil society that is controlled by the dictator himself.
Civil society is basically your electorate. It is not.
What about the media?
It is not a group. It includes the media is part of the electorate. These are all institutions.
What about trade unions, labor movements, and all those types of things, churches, and what have you?
Those are all part of civil society.
But these can be compromised across the continent. In fact, they have been compromised in the majority of the 54 countries that are members of the African Union.
And this is the point about ensuring that the institutions serve the people more than those in governance positions.